So at the fire department, we have a division in prevention that does fire investigations. When we're not out making sure the buildings are safe, if something does happen, we are going to go do a fire investigation. We're going to look at the scene and try to determine where the fire started and why. So at this house on 2nd Street, we did approximately a dozen training burns. We weren't able to burn the house down, didn't want to. So we have different rooms on different levels. We would do different sets to try to determine where those areas of origin are, and also the cause, if possible, that may have started that fire. And we're doing this in collaboration with DCI, the State Fire Marshal's Office, Wausau Fire Department, to train some of our newer employees and also some of their newer employees. Some of them have not been in actual fires before or even seen a building that was on fire. So this gives them a really good representation of what they might run into out there. So we're going to look at this room as our room of origin. The first thing that we want to look at, make sure that the door wasn't forced open. This does not appear to be forced open. There's no damage, any tool marking or anything like that. Then we want to go into the room. We want to kind of look at this as a total scene, and we want to look at basically floor to ceiling. We want to look for the areas of least amount of damage going towards the areas of most amount of damage that will typically bring us right to our area of origin. So as we look in this room, we can see paint that is cracked and peeling, obviously was exposed to some heat. And as we look further around this room in a clockwise direction here, we can see an area of some smoke staining and soot deposition. And that's basically just the particles sticking to the walls, the carbon particles. We get over into this corner and we can see some charring on this pallet here. So what that tells me is this was exposed to fire for a greater amount of time, or there was more fuel in this area that was burning. So what this flame pattern is called is a V-shaped pattern, and what that does is kind of brings us right to the seat of the fire. We can see some very low burning in this area, and as we look up to the right, we can see this pattern also going up to this direction. And what we see about a third of the way up is an area where there's no damage below, but greater damage above it. And we call this a line of demarcation, and that generally shows us where those hot gases were and where they weren't. So in this room, we had a significant amount of heat higher up because heat rises and fire is gonna wanna burn its way up. We look at the ceiling and we see paint has basically been burned off in this area, showing that there's more heat below that area compared to this area as we back out towards the door. So we see some survivability of the paint towards the door. Obviously there was less heat over there. We can look around the room, we can see that this room did not flash over, which means it took a smaller fire in a room that grew and turned into a room on fire. That didn't happen here. And we can see that we had some good ventilation in this room. So we have a lot of damage to the inside of this door frame, or this window frame, and we had a lot of hot gases and fire going out this area, and then we had some air entrainment, bidirectional flow of cooler air coming in to feed this fire. All we would have really seen is fire on the outside of this window. Inside here, we would have had thick black smoke down to about this level. Survivability of a person in this room would have been very poor, given that they would have had very little oxygen to breathe and very high heat up on the upper levels. We know that the fire started over in this area, and the reason why it doesn't burn over here is we have a lot of cooler air coming in, so it wasn't hot enough to continue burning over this direction with that cooler air coming in. So we're going to look at this as our area of origin, and this was an intentionally set fire. Given that there are no competent ignition sources in this area, that would be determined by lifting up each layer, documenting, making sure we don't find anything. But as a training burn, we know that this was started intentionally. All right, so in this room, we've got a bathroom that, as we come in here, we're gonna see that line of demarcation kind of pointing down. This V shape here, we also notice a lot of damage to the upper part of this hollow core door. These will typically hold fire for probably 10 or 15 minutes. This damage is gonna be coming from the outside from a previous burn, but we can look at this and see that this door has burned through at the top, totally consumed that thin 1/8 inch paneling on either side of it. Again, we want to look at the doors. This again being a training burn, we're not going to see any of that damage where someone had forced their way into a bathroom. We look at the switch plate, that is intact, but we can see that there's definitely some heat that was on the outside of that switch, but not coming from the inside. So as we come in further into this space, we're gonna see that the window was compromised. There was a lot of heat higher up in this room. We can see some charring on the window trim itself, fairly even around the window, but definitely more charring up at the higher areas. A lot of damage to the ceiling in here. This was definitely exposed to quite a fair amount of heat. We would want to look at the outlets, receptacles, and also the light fixtures to try to determine if something there had failed. We're typically not able to see that unless we can get those items x-rayed, which would have to be done at a fire lab somewhere. Our eyes are going to be drawn to this curling iron, which is in the sink. We can trace the wire, the power cord, and see that that is not plugged in. Did it become unplugged during the course of the fire? We're not sure. We would have to do some additional interviewing to figure that out. As we continue further into the bathroom, there's not a lot of damage back there, so we don't have to do a whole lot of further investigation for these purposes here. But what we do see is a really nice pattern on this wall where we can see an area of low burn, a lot of charring underneath this counter. There's a wastebasket there. We can see as that pattern, there's a lot of calcination and drying of that wall material. A lot of different colors in this pattern where it had burned through layers of either paint or wall finishings here. But you can see that that wrapped right around, went right up to the ceiling, and then spread out. So as a fire investigator, we need to look at the total scene and try to figure out where this had started. But it's generally those flame patterns, fire patterns that are going to bring us back to that area of origin. So we're going to look at this particular area of burning. We've got a room that's on fire, or was on fire over this area. This would be a dining room. What we're standing in is the living room. So what we're interested in is this burned area of pallets. And as we look at this a little bit closer, what we see is some burned areas of carpeting underneath here. And we know that that fire didn't start in this room and come this way, burn these pallets, or maybe these were moved prior to our arrival by suppression. So that would be a good point to interview those who were involved in putting the fire out to see if they did move these. Maybe they were in the other room. But what's curious is this area on the floor was, because we see that this area is burned, it's very likely that there was some type of an accelerant poured in this area. Lit on fire, we can see kind of a faint line from this area still burning, but nothing's dropped down into this, onto this carpet to start this on fire. So we would refer to this as an irregular fire pattern that's on the floor. And again, these pallets might be just sitting here, moved from the other room because they're not in normal orientation. We see some areas that are not burned below areas that are burned, and then them stacked on top of one another. This is just very interesting. We are not able to determine if this was an actual accelerant in this area. We would call in additional resources, State Fire Marshal's office. They have a dog that's called an accelerant detection canine, and they would bring a dog in, and those dogs would identify these areas of accelerants. And it's held very well within the carpet. And then that sample would be pulled, tested in a lab to confirm that there was actually accelerants there. Okay, so in this area, this is a kitchen. There's a small countertop to my left. Over to my right is where the sink would be. We actually have 2 areas of origin in this room. This one is a little more interesting because we've got a device here, like a small crock pot, and it is sitting here. It's got a wire cord that's attached. This is stranded copper. And what we would be looking for in this situation is to see if there was any arcing involved, if maybe this cord had gotten pinched or had failed. And just running my fingers, we don't feel anything different other than the stranded copper all the way down. So it's possible that this circuit may not have been active at the time, or this may not have been turned on, wasn't energized. But we do see a fair amount of burning on top of the counter. We also see a significant amount of damage in this small cabinet that's underneath, and we can see that V-shaped pattern again coming from the back side of that cabinet. And just looking at the way that this cabinet is, a lot of burning on the inside, not so much on the outside. So they had an area of origin inside this cabinet that had burned its way up, but not necessarily started this fire up above here. We don't see any burn through, even though we do see a significant amount of fire here. This was very likely 2 separate sets and 2 separate areas of origin. We can see a lot of charring on the inside of this support post down here, and very deep charring in this area. So there was a significant amount of heat getting trapped underneath this countertop to do that amount of damage. Nice line of demarcation underneath here to show that that heat was getting trapped up underneath this area, doing a lot of damage. One thing that I'd just like to add is, in a home like this, when we look around and we see how much damage, a lot of these rooms were burning to this extent just within a few minutes. So it's real important to have those working smoke alarms in the homes. Best defense against getting hurt in a house is that early detection, which comes from a smoke alarm. Those can go off, just within the first few seconds of a fire. Fires are burning hot and fast, and as soon as you hear those smoke alarms going off, get out of the house. And in the case of a real emergency, that's what's most important, is getting out of the home. So I had spent about 6.5 years on the line working as a paramedic firefighter, and once I found an opening in prevention, I decided to go for that because we can only do so much being reactive. I see this position as being a little more proactive. Best part is kind of going out there and being a crime fighter, because you get to go out and you get to figure it out. And a lot of learning happens by finding things out either on your own or working with other people. And we have a great time doing the education portion, and also learning ourselves and trying to figure out what happened. And that's probably the best part, is no scene is ever the same. No situation is the same as the last one. So everything is different. There's just a lot of dynamics in this position where we get to do a lot of different things. So I hope you enjoyed this video going over these different sets in the different rooms. As I look around, a lot of damage, but a lot of learning also went on.